Thank you everyone for joining us in the latest in the Insight series online. The introduction to the speakers today is going to be done by my colleague, Rebecca Horton. Rebecca, over to you to introduce today's content and the speakers. We really appreciate your time. Looking forward to a great session. Thank you very much.
Hello, I am Rebecca Greier Horton. I am one of 3 workplace wellbeing advisors at MillerKnoll. And what we do is bring our insights and knowledge to our clients with regard to well-being from a physical, social, and cognitive perspective. And today, with my 2 colleagues joining me, Kibibi Springs, Dr. Kibibi Springs, and Dr. Melissa Steach, we're going to share insights on how to build grit, sometimes known as resiliency, but we'll see that that's just a part of grit, to build better individuals, more gritty individuals, which lead to building better organizations, which fosters engagement and connectivity. So with that, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Kibibi Springs.
Thanks, Rebecca. So the question on the table today is, what is grit and why is it important? So let's start with a little foundation of how grit connects to our health and our well-being. According to the World Health Organization, health is defined as a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. It is not based on just disease and infirmity alone. So being holistically well is how we know that we are thriving and contributing our best to the world. And for organizations, the well-being exists when each individual is able to pursue their peak potential in life. And in combination with that, they also know how to manage their own stressor and norms for stress on a daily basis. And then they can also work productively. I'm going to take on the first portion of today's presentation and tell you why grit is important for you to build individually. And then Dr. Melissa Steach is going to pick up and show you how to build that in your work. And then we're going to close with Rebecca coming back on to close us out and share some insights and best practices that you can take away with you from this presentation to continue your learning journey here. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. We start with this definition of grit from the primary researcher in this space, Dr. Angela Duckworth, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. When we think about grit, we often do think of resilience, and it has become more of interest to us as of late because we have all been charged with building up our resiliency, so to speak, during these trying times. But grit is about the passion and sustained perseverance when it's applied towards long-term achievement. And it's no longer about the concern for rewards or recognition along the way, but simply the pursuit of the work for the work's sake. So the American Psychology Association, they say that resilience is the process of adapting well. And that adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, and all things that might deter us from our path. So we can see that grit is really the stuff that fuels our metaphorical fires, that keeps our drive moving forward, that helps to keep our motivation moving towards those goals that we want to achieve every day. I want you to ask yourself this question. Do you think that you have a fixed or a growth mindset? So we're going to prime your mind to be thinking a little bit differently. In other words, do you know everything that there is to know, a fixed mindset? Or are you very open to learning new things, especially things that you think you already have down as rote, learning a new way of doing something that is normal in your routine? And that's where our growth really comes from. So we're going to talk about how we can grow using grit as part of our fuel to get us to some of our bigger goals. Now, Dr. Carol Dweck, who does a lot of work in the area of growth mindset, she finds that in students, there is a difference between performance when it comes to showing a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And in her studies, students who approached performance with the attitude that everything that they had as far as personal traits that they were born with were what they were given. And that if they didn't exceed in those things naturally, then there was no way for them to improve. But students who had the ability to look at something that they didn't do well, and they believed that they could grow their development in those areas, little by little, they weren't afraid of failure. They actually viewed it and embraced it as an opportunity for exponential growth. Those are the ones who were able to persist during setbacks. So in the chat, I want you to think of something that you have learned that was new in the last 6 months? And we'll just share that with us for a moment. Something new that you learned in the last 6 months that would illustrate that you have somewhat of a growth mindset. So let's start diving into the grit characteristics. There are 5 of them. At this point, I don't want you to worry about taking too many notes. We have a very robust follow-up document that's going to give you all of these definitions. Instead, please just lean in and jot down what resonates most with you, because there's a lot to share here. We're going to start by identifying some of these grit characteristics in some infamous people that we know. And each of these people that we selected just illustrated one aspect of grit that we wanted to share with you to kind of get your mind turning around who in your life might be a little bit gritty. So please feel free to also fill the chat while I'm sharing this with people that come to mind that exhibit these characteristics for you. First up, we have Malala Yousafzai. Now, Malala's courage to stand up for girls' education by putting her own life on the line, that was definitely an act of courage. And it wouldn't have been an act of courage if she didn't have such a deep belief system in what she was standing up for. In the area of conscientiousness, we have Ray and Charles Eames. Now, interestingly enough, in Dr. Angela's book on grit, she mentions that relationship building actually has conscientiousness at the core of it, and that relationships that last longest tend to have very conscientious players in the relationship themselves. So we can see that with Ray and Charles, their conscientiousness in their relationship as well as their design intent was shown to the world. Next, we have Frida Kahlo, who exhibits our characteristic of perseverance. Through great physical hardship, Frida Kahlo was still able to bring her dream of her artistic expression to the world. And then for resilience, we have Nelson Mandela. Through all of his trials and tribulations, he showed us that if you have a belief in your vision and you have the fortitude to see it through and you show resilience, you can achieve great feats. And finally, we have Dame Zaha Hadid. Now, the New York Times said that Dame Zaha Hadid, she reshaped what we think of architecture as art. And through her ability to expand upon the architectural norms to pursue her own level of excellence, she gave us something that has changed the world of architecture going forward. I'm looking at the chat and I'm looking for some interesting opportunities to share some other people that you feel embody these characteristics. Fantastic. So let's unpack some of these characteristics a little bit more deeply. When it comes to courage, this can be very hard to measure, but it's very directly proportional to our level of grit. So think about the things that you have been able to stand up and be a little bit courageous about. It relates to our ability to manage fear and failure. When you are faced with something, whether it's a big thing or a little thing that makes you feel a little bit uneasy, do you step into it and try it anyway, or do you back away from it? So our ability to manage fear is really a courageous act in everything that we do. We don't fear failures. We embrace them as a part of the process. If you've ever failed, you know that there are a ton of lessons to be learned in failure. So we understand that the lessons from defeat are much more valuable than the lessons of victory. Conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is one of the big 5 human personality characteristics, and it is the one that is most connected to grit. It is the hallmark of the high achiever. When we think about conscientious people, they are a combination of both very dependable people who are very measured and controlled in their approach, but they also have a high drive for achievement. So they are going to pursue the goal in the right way, the way that they envision it, until they get there. And they're not going to let obstacles deter them. Their ability to hold tight to the intention, even through the failures, even through the naysayers, is what makes them very conscientious to their goals. And they don't just suit up and show up. They actually suit up to show up with their own sense of personal excellence. Perseverance, one of my favorite words. This really has to deal with the long haul. How good are we at sustaining practice towards a bigger goal that is going to take a while, that we may not even see the end goal in sight for a minute, but we're going to put that practice of mastery into play until we get there. When we have long-term goals and we have a context and a framework for some kind of meaning or value to those long-term efforts, this is the kind of thing that helps to fuel our own engagement at work. How we're going to engage in the pursuit is just as important as achieving the goal at the end. Resilience, the most popular word as it relates to grit, is really a component of grit, and it really empowers grit. So this is the thing that when things are going tough, it kind of lifts our head up and helps us to be hopeful and keeps us moving forward to that bigger vision and the goal and the way that we saw it and intended it to work out for ourselves. Gritty people, when they have resilience, what they think is everything will be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, then it's not the end yet. So they're going to continue until they see that vision fulfilled to their satisfaction. And then there's excellence. Now, excellence is all about an attitude. Many people misconstrue excellence as the pursuit of perfection. The word excellence is derived from the Greek word arete, which is closely associated with virtue. Excellence is a characteristic that helps us to be self-compassionate. It is a very forgiving characteristic. It means that even if we don't hit the mark, if we know that we pursued it with excellence, we're going to embrace that as somewhat of a victory, and we're going to learn from those failures, and we're going to seek out those opportunities for improvement. Excellence really allows us to be a little bit disappointed, but it prioritizes the progress. So when we're practicing something that to a level of mastery for our own selves, whether that's playing an instrument, achieving a work goal, pursuing a sport, it is as much about the progress of achieving that particular goal as it is about the actual goal and the achievement itself. So again, grit is not about the reward or the recognition, but it's really just about knowing that we gave our absolute best to the process and that we are going to put the progress over the perfection. Here's also a very interesting thing to note about excellence. In the research study, anxiety, low self-esteem, obsessive compulsive disorders, substance abuse, and clinical depression are the few of the conditions that are ascribed to perfectionism. So we can see that excellence is a much healthier way of pursuing goals than seeking perfection, which is really never attainable because it really, the needle just keeps moving on perfection. So we want to seek excellence in everything that we do. It's much more achievable. So now I'm going to pose the question, now that we've gone through all 5 of those characteristics, what gritty people do you know that possess all 5 characteristics? Feel free to fill that up in the chat. Awesome. Seeing some good comments here. Perfectionism is unattainable and ultimately erodes self-esteem. For sure. So now we're going to talk about how do we build grit in ourselves. This is the meat of today's presentation. The key ingredient to grit is really about building self-efficacy. And that refers to an individual's belief in his or her own capacity to execute behaviors that produce specific results. So we all hope to have some self-efficacy over the things that we especially engage in every day. It's also known in the studies that self-efficacy helps us to improve our self-esteem, which in turn supports positive traits like courage, conscientiousness, perseverance, resilience, and excellence, all of these things that lead to grit. So here's how to build it in yourself. 1, find something that is absolutely fascinating to you that you can pursue for long term. Now, it's important not to think about just erasing the board here and trying something new, but think about something that you do every day that you really enjoy. And what is one component of that that you could break down, that you could practice getting a little bit better at? This is one of those keys to work engagement, where we're just really focused on improving our skill set little by little, taking everything that comes to us as a lesson for improvement. Practice. When we practice, we get a little bit better every day. And practice is not something that comes innate to everybody. Some of us need to really practice how we practice, so to speak, because it requires some diligence and fortitude, and it requires consistency. Connecting to a higher purpose. When we're asking how we can help other people, that puts more purpose behind the work that we do. And so therefore we find it may be easier to persevere in the light of obstacles or failures or things that are not necessarily going our way. But connecting what we do to a higher purpose, whether that's for ourselves, for someone else in our lives, for our organization, that really helps to keep the energy going. And it helps us to cultivate hope, because when we don't have hope in something, it's really difficult to keep that vision in mind and to keep moving towards it. Surrounding yourself with gritty people. They say birds of a feather flock together. And this is one of the reasons. We tend to become those whom we share the most time with. And so it's important to make sure that those around us not only share our values around fun and enjoyment, but also the things that we really have in mind to the bigger goals in life that we have for ourselves. I know I have a very gritty group of friends that are always seeking to achieve new things and learning new ways of doing things. And that motivates me to try harder in whatever it is that I'm engaged with. So take a look around at your circle. And if any of those gritty people that you identified are actually close to you, live in your home, or that you work with, how can you spend more time with them? And how can you let that be a positive energy exchange between people? So now we get to this point. What grit tip resonates the most with you and why? We'll let you fill that up while we continue on. I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Melissa Steach to pick up how we build it at work.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Now, if we were to think of our personal and our professional groups, for example, our family, our work teams, our communities even, as organizations, we can more easily imagine how our individual mindsets support the team. In industrial and organizational psychology, organizational citizenship behavior, otherwise known as OCB, is a person's voluntary commitment within an organization or company that is not part of his or her contractual task. So this is something that you do to go above and beyond what you're actually on paper supposed to do. Much like grit, which by definition has no particular concern with reward or recognition, organizational commitment encourages you to meaningfully engage and thereby exhibit the characteristics of courage, conscientiousness, perseverance, resilience, and excellence, simply because you deem it important to be and do your best as a citizen of that group. This citizenship behavior helps to create positive social and psychological environments in which work and people can flourish. Furthermore, organizational citizenship behavior can enhance social connections that influence job performance and even positive community engagement. And now we will go through some tips. If you are not a social person, becoming more social, or in other words, purposely connecting with others can help. Research has shown that the more we see each other, the more we like each other. Social distancing doesn't inhibit social connection, and this is an important one to remember. So utilize technology and feel and be safe when you do go out and about to your level of comfort so that you can get and remain connected to new and familiar people. Get control over how you respond to the adverse events and you experience. Positive psychology techniques like reframing, one of my favorites, can really help. Doing so yourself will encourage people on your team to do the same. Folks are always watching, and don't forget that we have mirror neurons, right? So what we see, we very often exhibit ourselves. If I smile, you smile, for example. Now for tip 3, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus gets credit for saying the only constant in life is change. So we say get used to it. Sometimes a goal needs to be abandoned because it's no longer attainable or it's no longer even relevant to you. Things change, your priorities change, what's important to you changes. The inability to accept things that one cannot change is like continuing to spin a chainless wheel. And it is natural to want to control your environment. In fact, people who are allowed the opportunity, for example, to personalize their workspace express greater satisfaction with their work and have a stronger sense of belonging to their work group. The goal is to identify what is reasonably within your control, as well as accept what is outside of it. Tip 4, apply the Kaizen principle to your goals. Start with the absolute smallest component that relates to the larger long-term goal. As Walt Disney famously said, we keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things because we're curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. Leading by example outperforms leading through lecture. Today, more than ever before, people invest in organizations that walk their talk. Social ergonomics relies on authenticity, since much of what is communicated is by sight and behavior signaling rather than verbal communication. Again, gets back to those mirror neurons. Tip 5, commit to making decisions when you find yourself in a tough situation, being willing to make tough calls for the group, or in contrast to, and that's something important to remember, if you believe it's best for all. As we've seen, organizations that vacillate on important topics can experience fallout in the form of employee disengagement and even buyer boycotts. An interesting experiment demonstrated how a sudden change, for example, in the manager of a work group's mood affected not only the mood of their direct reports who were working on a task, it also impacted a pressure increase on their spine as well as stress responses in their brain. So these cognitive disconnects that we witness sometimes, whether it's out in society or it's at home or it's at work, it actually literally can have a physical effect on our bodies. Tip 6, we can learn a lot about ourselves when we struggle through a bad experience. Ask your team how has their relationship grown within the team, or how as a team might we have gained strength or perspective thanks to a mistake or a missed opportunity. Very often we as teams and at work, we cry over spilled milk without actually going back far enough to evaluate what was the cause of it being spilled in the first place. And therein lies a lot of opportunity for growth, for strengthening of the team, and for, of course, moving together forward even more effectively. And in the spirit of this, close work friendships boost employee satisfaction by 50%, and people with a best friend at work are 7 times more likely to engage fully in their work. You're therefore more likely to stay at a job when you have a friend, and self-awareness and self-reflection are critical for developing positive long-term relationships, and any meaningful relationship takes trust, time, and arguably one if not all 5 of the characteristics of grit. Tip 7, get this negative self-talk. You don't need it. Trust that you are in the position you're in for a reason, that you know yourself better than anyone else, and that you have the intelligence and power to make forthright decisions. That's why your team voted you to be the leader, the group, of the project. You can solve problems as they arise. Perseverance in the face of doubt is what gets grit to the finish line. Tip 8, bad things will happen, so look through a wide lens before overreacting to a negative event. How significant is it really? If you were to take out piece of paper starting from the day you were born to 100 years from then, right? Put a dot, the age where you are right now, and then make a note along that line of all of the significant events in your life. When you look over at it on this longer trajectory, it's not, I mean, how big a deal is it really within the full scope of things? This is what resilience is all about. Really taking stock of how big something is. So think about that spilled milk. How much longer are you going to spend being concerned about that? Tip 9, practice optimism. Acknowledge what the team does right, then learn from what the team can improve on. This is not a denial of what's not working. It is an acknowledgement of what is good and what is possible in your life, both personally and professionally, individually, and as a team. Tip 10. Finally, there are a lot of tips here, so don't worry, we have a great handout. Set an example by demonstrating self-compassion. It will encourage your team to behave similarly. For example, get some exercise, learn something new, and spend time laughing. Self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. Remember, gritty behavior can benefit groups by helping to build a shared identity that is anchored in self-esteem and self-efficacy by virtue of persisting toward a long-time goal together. This can boost group morale as a result, and no matter win or lose, the passion and dedication to seeing the journey through is the key. This shared experience can increase collective levels of meaningfulness, which is good for performance and productivity. And as it relates to organizational citizenship behavior, research shows that this behavior positively impacts performance and creates better social interactions between group members. Now we have another chat for you, and going through tips 1 through 10, which of these tips can you try at work today? Is that making connections, managing how you perceive and respond to adversity, how you reframe a missed opportunity perhaps, or applying the Kaizen principles to achieve your group work goals? Just, just make note of a few of these. And with that, I am going to hand over to Rebecca the remaining of our presentation as she goes through best practices and next steps. Oh, these are great. Embrace change, be flexible. Yes, flexibility, make connections is not always about who you know, but who knows what you need to know. Interesting. That's great, Mark. Thank you. Change, as change is constant. All right, Rebecca.
Thank you, Dr. Steach. So there's a lot of good chat, a lot of good ideas. Thank you for your input and your shares. We very much appreciate that. So in light of what grit is, and it's not, remember, synonymous with resilience, but rather resilience is a part of grit. Courageousness, conscientiousness, perseverance, resiliency, and excellence. We want to share with you some best practices. So we'll begin with focusing on what we can control, and that's a tough one. Gritty people can develop improved home lives, communities, and work cultures through these simple best practices. So by focusing on what we can control, we can keep a growth mindset. And I did pop some further information on growth mindset earlier on in the chat. So we want to retain our personal choice. We want to persevere through obstacles and learn from our mistakes. That's big. We plan, do, check, act. Dr. Steach mentioned Kaizen. So that is, an integral part of always striving to get better. This will keep us confident and our open mind for growth. Set an example with our colleagues, with our family members and friends. If we exemplify the traits of courage, conscientiousness, perseverance, resilience, and excellence, and live grit, it is exactly like Dr. Steach mentioned, our mirror neurons will pick up on that and they will start to emulate those qualities as well. Encourage teamwork. This is huge. The last 2 years have been rough at best. So as we draw together, an important aspect of teamwork is accepting that we are not always going to be the star of the show. We're not always going to have that individual reward. We're working for a long-term goal that may require that we step back a little bit. We don't want to achieve things just for our own selfish or personal reasons, but rather wanting to also look at a bigger picture and pursue achievement because that's who we are. Connecting the qualities of the group to the goals of the group. If you have something in common and you're focused on a common goal, it's easy to align ourselves in these qualities. Remember that organizational citizenship behavior that Dr. Springs mentioned, that we form as a group and we actually perform better when we know that others are relying on us. This comes into play, especially when we share these common goals. And then finally, don't overregulate. That's tough, you know, any control freaks out there. I'm guilty at times. Don't overregulate. You have to allow grit to come from within, and it's a journey. It's developed over time. It's not going to be an instant snap of the fingers and you're granted these qualities. You need to be allowed to set your intentions, set about achieving them in increments, and as a result, you'll be allowed to fail, to pivot, and then endure through those failures to develop those qualities of grit. Recall that developing gritty behavior builds a shared identity that's anchored in self-esteem and persists to a long-term goal. As we do it together, boost the group morale, no matter whether we win or lose. Next slide, Kibibi. Next steps. As you take grit away from you, you can take these learnings wherever you go in spirit. So we invite you to act on at least one or two of these steps a day. So each day this week, I want you to try to focus on the 5 characteristics and observe how these show up for you. So you particularly may be courageous in a particular situation where you might not otherwise be. You know, think about these. Are you going to bring your most conscientious self into a project? So how are you going to show up knowing these? And where would you like these traits to show up more often for you? And then what 5 behaviors can you hold yourself accountable to that will increase your chances of reaching the goals that you set for yourself and for your organization? Write these down. It's easy to forget. So that way you have accountability to yourself, fostering conscientiousness, and then get an accountability partner to work on these things. Next slide, Kibibi. Finally, in closing, developing grit requires mindful practice of courage, conscientiousness, perseverance, resilience, and excellence. It requires intention, diligence, and vulnerability. And I'm going to leave you with a quote of one of our favorite social psychologists and researchers, Brene Brown. I'm going to read it verbatim. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. Grit provides our greatest chance for acting courageously. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If the other speakers want to put their videos on, that would be good as well. If we have any questions before we say goodbye to our speakers, please feel free to use the chat box to do that. There will be a follow-up email tomorrow where we will share so much of this material that has been shared already. But if you've got any questions, do let us know. Just to let you know that when you leave this, you will be taken to a website which just asks you to give us some feedback. So don't panic, you're not being taken to a strange website. It's my website, just with SurveyMonkey. And we also have some great events coming up. The next one in 2 weeks covers the subject of designing workplaces for the menopause. So quite a variety of subjects. So do look out for that in 2 weeks. Any questions at all from you out there, please let us know. Looks like they are all very quiet. They're taking it all in. They're digesting it. And I really thank you guys for challenging us today. And as Alessandra saying, we got a lot to digest. Any tips on how best to build grit? Any tips for all 3 of you? Give us one tip that you might have used to build grit. Start with you, Rebecca, as you're on the screen at the moment.
My favorite is, and someone did already mention this, is surrounding myself with gritty people. It's easy for me to get in my groove and my flow and think I'm doing pretty good. And then obviously I worked with some really pretty incredible people, and working together and seeing how they approach problems and how they weather the storm allows me to not get caught up in the negativity. It's easy to get up in the negativity wheel. So you just, form that little riddled in your brain, that path in your brain that's negative, to surround myself with gritty people who have all those, who embody those characteristics. I just can't work in a place of negativity. So that's my favorite one.
Thank you. Dr. Kibibi, do you have one that you wanted to share?
For me, it is the practice, practice, practice. And that is because I'm always working on my patients, and practice definitely takes a lot of patience. And it's not always super exciting, like big breakthroughs don't always happen every day when it comes to practice. It can be very mundane and rote until you finally, you know, if you're practicing an instrument, you finally hit that chord effortlessly, or, you know, you nail the dismount, so to speak. And so getting the process of getting there is where I am personally always putting in the practice.
Great, thank you very much. And Melissa?
Now, I set insane stretch goals, meaning I tend to set goals for myself that I think that I know are probably impossible to attain. And what it does is it gets me in the habit of not limiting myself in terms of what I think I can do, but going as far as what might be possible. And it also gets me very comfortable with failure. So I think the important thing is, like, you try, you make the leap, and if you fall short and fall, it's about getting up as fast as you can, brushing yourself off, and then stretching again. And that's something that I really believe in doing.
Great, thank you. Emmanuel asks, as a leader, you may not be appreciated by everyone in the team. What tips can you share on how to maintain a positive and motivated environment? Who would like to go with that one?
I'll start. I think that vulnerability piece really bears a lot of weight when it comes to leadership. You know, who doesn't respect a leader who can admit their own flaws, share when they have personally not shown up for themselves the way that they would like to? And I think it gives the entire group permission to acknowledge the same thing and to know that it is okay. And that's what creates really safe environments.
Thank you. Melissa, I think you were going to say something as well.
No, I think Kibibi summarized that very well. I have nothing to add.
Great. Viewing the what and is and what can improve without placing blame to foster a growth mindset. I love that, Rebecca. Thank you very much. That's that, which I think that whole idea of that growth mindset is really interesting. One of the things that I've found that I've built, Grit, is almost, I want people to give me a tight deadline. That for me forces me to do stuff. Don't tell me your deadline's 6 months away, because ever guess what? I'm not going to do that. But if it's 6 hours away, it's amazing. That's I quite love. It's not always about being without pressure. It's how you manage pressure, which I always love that kind of thought. So thank you very much, guys. This has been a fantastic session. I really appreciate everything that you've done. It's been great to hear from you, and we all look forward to practicing what you have now preached to us, and we look forward to getting your output tomorrow. So thank you very much for a great session. Everyone from around the world, thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget, fill in the feedback form, but also do join us on our upcoming webinars. And again, the link has just gone into the chat box. Rebecca, Melissa, Kibibi, thank you very much. It's great to have such knowledgeable colleagues on board. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Mark.
do stay on board, because today's applause comes via the chat box. That's where your thanks comes. So thank you very much, and I'll switch off in a moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.